Tip Tut.
Wow, this is going to be a long series, you guys, so buckle in. Hello, and welcome back to Tip Tut. Today, and for the next few weeks, we're going to be looking at an introduction to motion graphics in After Effects. I'm going to assume you have a little bit of knowledge of After Effects. I'm going to try and keep it pretty basic, but I'm going to assume that you've at least opened it up and had a look around and you know where some of the buttons are to do things. But apart from that, this is going to be a brand new beginner's guide to motion graphics. So let's dive right in. We're basically going to recreate what you just saw. However, I'm not going to teach you how to create it exactly, because the whole point of this series is it's not going to be some bullshit thing that you see on YouTube where someone comes along and goes, I'm going to teach you how to make this, and then they don't actually teach you how they made it. They just say, click this, do that, go there, and you don't actually learn anything, okay? And that's not what we're about here at Tip Tut. It's not what we try to be about. We try to be actually teaching things, actually making new designers learn how to do things, why things work the way they do. And that's what we're going to try and do here. I'm not going to say we succeed. This is an experiment for me as much as it is for you, but hopefully you guys can learn something. So basically, let's dive right in then. The first thing you're going to want to do is make sure you've got your assets together. Now, I've got here, for example, a clip of audio, which is the music you heard, and that's pretty much all that I need to get started in this project. Now, you can download this from the website as a package if you want to look around, but I highly recommend that you don't copy what I do here. You use the examples that I provide to create your own work, because that's what it's all about, being creative, being imaginative. Anyone can copy and paste. There's no point in it. It's stupid, yeah? Like, what you want to do is be able to create your own graphics, create your own motion. And that's what I'm hopefully going to try and teach you. So let's dive right in. First thing you're going to want to do is create a new composition, like so. I'm going to call this one Tutorial Current, so that we don't get confused with any of the older tutorial files I've got in my example here. I'm going to choose 60 frames per second. However, you can choose 30 if your computer can't quite handle it. And the duration of 40 seconds is about right for what we need. So let's hit OK. You can see here that we've now got along our timeline window, we've got an empty timeline, we've got our composition window here, we've got a bunch of tools down the right, we have our effects panel, we have our project, which carries all of the files that we need, and then there's some plugins down here. Now these are new. If you take a look at the screen here in these effects that I've got open, you can see that I've got Motion 2 or Motion V2 from Mount MoGraph, which is an incredible plugin. From aescripts.com, I'm using Ease and Wiz, and I'm also using Decompose Text. Now, I am going to show you how to do this all without any plugins whatsoever, because I understand that you might not have the financial capabilities to pay for your own plugins. That's fine. However, if you do have the extra money, I highly recommend getting at least Motion V2. It is fantastic and saves so much time when making motion graphics. But I am going to show you how to do it without any plugins, just because I understand that not everybody can, will, or wants to use plugins. So let's get started. If you go up to your layers panel whilst you have your timeline selected, you can hit New, Solid. And what this basically does, it can create a background for you. We'll call it background. We'll make sure it's the size of our layout here, and we'll hit OK. And now it's already the right color for me because I've just set all this up. However, you can use the eyedropper to choose whatever color you like. Now, what we're going to go through today is this first segment. And we're going to get to there, okay? Now, this doesn't seem like a lot, but it does introduce a lot of ideas, which is why I don't want to overflow you in this first episode. So let's look at this chronologically then. We've got some strokes that go around the edge of an invisible word, like so. We've got a word that pops in onto the screen. That word then scales up and underlines itself, and then disappears, okay? Now, that doesn't seem like a lot, but it will be enough to get started with, trust me. Okay, so the first thing you're gonna want to do, select your text tool and just type out whatever it is you want to appear on screen. Greetings, Tip Tutters, okay. Now, as soon as you click the selection tool again, you'll notice that you have a box around your text, and then this little circle with 4 lines coming out of it, this is basically your anchor point. If you edit anything on this text at the moment, you'll notice it edits it around this anchor point. If we rotate it, it does it via that. If we scale it up, it does it via the anchor point, for example. Now, all of this happens via the anchor point. Anything you do to this piece of text will happen via the anchor point. Okay, now we don't want it to be the bottom left, we want it to be in the center. Now with Motion V2, what you can do is just with your layer selected, you can click one of these anchor points and it positions it to that part of the layer. However, if you don't have Motion V2, you can just use the pan behind tool and you can move it manually by clicking that and dragging it around. Now, Motion V2 basically saves time by just clicking it in the center. Then if you hit P to bring up your position of your item, you can place it in the center and you know that it's exactly in the center of your composition, which is really useful, saves a lot of time. Okay, so that's good. Now, if we click on this, we notice it's still text editable. We can still change anything that we want to change. Like for example, if I select the word Tip Tut, I want to make that yellow. So I bring up my color palette, which I have here, hit copy, and then hit paste. Now, what this is just a website with a series of nice colors on that I use for Tip Tut. It's made by flaturcolors.com. It's very good. Highly recommend checking it out. If only because you can click things, it copies it to the clipboard and then you can paste it back inside your document here. I think that if you've got CC, you can actually use a library as well. I haven't got the hang of that yet. I still prefer to do it my way. But that's the good thing about After Effects. There's 1,000 ways to do the same thing, so it's totally up to you how you want to do something. Now, the way to get started is working backwards in After Effects, believe it or not. The best thing to do is choose what you want your final state of your animation to be. Say, for example, this, and work backwards from it. So let's divvy it up into sections then. The first thing we want to do is this first section here. Okay, and what that does is a line quickly darts around the shape of the words greetings, tip tutters. If you can see it sort of there almost, you can see it. Where's the best frame? There, kind of those ones. You can see it kind of says greetings, tip tutters. Doesn't matter because it goes and then pops in. You're like, oh, that's what it said. Okay, now that's fine, we can do that. But first we want to make sure that our text is going to be the right shape and size. So I'm okay with the size, that doesn't really matter, but I do want to increase the space between the letters a bit. So we'll just go over here to our character window. If you can't see any of these windows, by the way, you can just click window up here and you can select them and turn them on and off and they'll appear. So for example, if we want audio to appear, it comes up there. We can get rid of audio again. Actually, it might be quite useful to have up. We'll keep that. So I've selected my text and I can just increase the size between letters by clicking here. Let's maybe try 50. Yeah, that seems about okay. And now, however, you can see that our anchor point is slipped. So we can just recenter it, hit position again, and recenter, which is why Motion V2 is so fantastic, just for simple things like that. Okay, so we created the way we want our text to be in its final state. Now we need to make a stroke around this text and get rid of the fill. So that's what we're going to do now. If you select your layer and hit Control D, that duplicates it. Then you can hide the original one, which is really useful because then you know you've got a version that you haven't ballsed up yet, basically. So right click on that layer and choose Create Shapes from Text. Now this basically gives you a series of shapes rather than editable fonts. So if I click one of these, for example, you can see that I get a text shape that I can't edit. Whereas if I hide that layer and reveal the text one, if I click on it, I can actually select and change the type if I want to. Okay, understand? Now let's hide the text layer and keep the shape layer up for the moment. You can see now that we've got slightly different options along the top. We have a fill and we have a stroke. So if I double click the fill, you can see that you can actually give all of this text a color, okay, and make it all the color you want. We don't want that though, we want a stroke, and that basically makes a line around the edge of your shape, okay? So if you alt click the color on fill, it basically takes you through a number of options and you want the one with a line through it, and that means nothing, no fill, okay? And then you go to stroke and you choose the color you want and hit okay. And it gives you a stroke of an automatic width. Now 2 pixels is about right for me. So if I deselect that, you can see now that our text, our shapes, has a line around it with no fill. However, it has all become yellow. So if we go up here and click our layer, if you hit U, that collapses it, which is quite handy. And then we can basically zoom in and select our individual letters. Oops, misclick there. select our individual letters and choose the ones that we want to have a white stroke on them. I think I'll move that slightly. Yeah. And then leave the ones that we want to make sure have a yellow stroke. Now, it may be better if we just lock this layer here. Might be able to click and drag. Is that going to happen? No, okay. What we'll do then to make this a bit easier is make it all white and then click these individuals here, just a few less things to click, and make those yellow. So you double click inside there, go to our color palette, hit yellow, and paste. Now, like I said earlier, I may be going a bit fast, but this is because I don't want you to copy me, okay? I want you to make your own thing. So you should be pausing and playing the video and then sort of doing this, then coming back to it. This isn't a follow along, okay? So you've got your outlines now. With 2 pixels, it's got a question mark because we've got 2 different colors there. And now we want to learn how to make these dash around like they did in this video. Okay, and that's actually very simple. So what you want to do is click this little 12 down arrow here and choose the add button. This basically adds a property to this layer. And we want to add the property trim path. Okay, and you'll notice that it expands your layers to all of your individual shapes and adds on the bottom of them a trim path, which if you twirl down has a start, an end, and an offset. Now, they have these little stopwatches, and these basically create keyframes, and keyframes is how you do animation within After Effects. So if you hit start and you hit end on the stopwatch, that generates keyframes for you, okay? Now, this creates some diamonds in the timeline, and this is basically saying this, in exactly how it looks now, I want to create a state of existence that I can then change at a later point, okay? So if we were to move along the timeline, by selecting Control Shift and then the arrow keys, that basically moves you along 10 frames. If you do that 6 times, that moves us along a second because we're on 60 frames per second. And then we need to hit the keyframes again, like so, it creates 2 more. Okay, now at the moment we haven't made any changes, so it doesn't look like any animation is taking place. But say, for example, we were to click this arrow to move to our last keyframe, and we were to make both the start and end point at 100%, it looks like the text has disappeared. And that's because what has happened on each individual letter, it's created a start point, say here, and an end point here, and it's that line around it is assigned a number of spaces in between, so that when you drag, like so, it all comes back, okay? So now we want our end point to be completely invisible, and we want our start point to be completely invisible, but at opposite ends of the spectrum, okay? So we want 0% and 0% animating to 100% and 100%. Now it looks like at the moment nothing is happening, and that's because the 0 and the 100 are happening at the same time, the start and end points, so they're catching up with each other, if that makes sense. And to explain that, I can just offset these and you'll immediately get what I mean. If I hit Alt and then right, that basically shifts the keyframes along. I'll do it by about 3 frames. And now if we drag through, you'll notice that our white lines appear, okay? And there's 3 frames of width on them, okay, if that makes sense. So if we were to play it, our lines now animate, okay? Now, it looks a bit boring because there's no easing like there is on this other one here. Okay, that goes from like super fast to super slow. Yeah? Now, these ones sort of just animate at a constant speed, which is a bit boring. So we're thinking, okay, how do we animate that to timing? We don't know what we are working with. This is where your piece of music comes in. If I go to my assets folder over here, I have my audio.wav. If I just drag that down to the timeline, I can add it on. And if I hit L a couple of times, it brings up the waveform of that audio. Now, if we were to hit play, okay, it plays the audio and plays the animation, but it still doesn't look right. Okay, it looks kind of boring. And that's because we want to add some easing to these keyframes, right? So if I zoom in a little here, so we can see it a bit better. There are 2 ways to do this. One of them is with the Motion V2 plugin, and one of them is manually. I'll show you manually, and then I'll show you how quick the Motion V2 plugin makes it. So basically, we want to make it start very fast and animate out to slow, which is fine. If we right-click on these keyframes with them selected and choose Keyframe Assistant Easy Ease, that gives you little egg timers instead of diamonds. And what that does is it basically eases in or sort of slides in that animation to make it go from slow to speeding up and then speeding up back down to slow to give it a bit of weight. Okay, so if we look at that again now, okay, it sort of starts off slow and then speeds up and slows down again. Now, for a visual aid of that, you can select your keyframes and choose this graph editor here. and it brings up the keyframes. It's the same information, just displayed in a slightly different way. Okay, now if we was to select these points on this graph, it gives you little handles, and you can see that the line represents speed, goes from all the way up and all the way back down again. So slowly into fast and then fast back down to slow. Okay, like that. Now, if you want that to go from fast to slow in general, so appear fast and slow out, you can just select these keyframes and drag the little handles to adjust the speed or the influence of the graph. So you could drag this handle all the way out, so now it'll go fast, slow, like that. And if you wanted to, you could drag these all the way in, so that it's going from the fastest possible all the way to slow. Now, if we were to watch that again, you see it sort of bam, gives it a bit more oomph. It follows the method of the music a bit more. Bam, like that, okay? Now, if we were to leave these unadjusted, you can see that it still starts slow, but goes very fast to slow again after that. Okay, it's a bit more of a rather than, yeah? Kind of hard to explain, but you can get the feel of it once you start doing it yourself. I want it to be completely fast, going down to slow. Now, that took a long time, yeah? To do that, which is a kind of a pain. So I'm going to show you how quick it is to do with Motion V2. Now, it sounds like I'm selling this, and I suppose I am, but I'm not being paid to sell it. I just think it's fucking great. If I hit Control and then click these keyframes, that basically removes everything we've done. It returns them to their default value. Okay. Now, everything that we just did can be done in one click. You go over to here to these sliders, and you have easing in and out, and easing in here. So you can just slide these, and this is the degree to which you want that to happen. So if I slide in all the way to the top and let go, bam, we've just achieved the exact same effect. And if we go to the graph editor, you can see here that it's created the exact same effect that we just did manually, apart from it does it all for you. So it's as quick as that, yeah? Much easier. So Motion V2, everyone, I highly recommend you get it, but the first way I did it is if you don't have Motion V2 and don't want it. Let's move on then. So we've done this first bit. What happens after that? Let's go and check. So our text comes in and then pops in from the bottom of the screen, okay? Like this. Yeah, pop, and slides in. That's nice and easy to do. Now, this is why it was good that we saved our text layer, okay? So now what we can do is just make this text layer visible, hit P to bring up position, and then we're gonna make some new keyframes in the same way that we just did for the outlines, apart from since all we wanna do is change the position here, it's very simple. So we want to go to the point in the music where it actually hits. It's the impact, yeah? So now if I click and scrub, you can see that the audio doesn't play. However, if I do that with Control held, it plays the music for you. Now, luckily, this is quite impactful music, so you can see the spike where that music comes in. Yeah, like so. So we can just position our keyframe here, and we know that this is where we want our animation to pop to start. So we hit position keyframe, stopwatch, it generates a keyframe for you. We can hit Control, Shift, and right to move 10 frames, and we do that 5 times or 6 times to get to, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, miscounted there, to move a second in time, and then we hit another keyframe. So this is where we want it to end up, so we make sure that's our second keyframe, and then we go back to the first one and we move it. So we can hold Shift and press down, and that moves it on the screen. Okay, so then we were to do this. It animates between those 2 keyframes and moves it in a position. Okay, so now if we select both of those, we can do it manually by making this look a bit cooler. Right click, keyframe assistant, easy ease, graph editor, select frames, drag, drag. Or, so that does this, okay? Or we can do this. And it does all of that for you, okay? Now imagine if you do that 50,000 times in a project. It's much quicker with using Motion V2. Okay, now if you want to, you can then go back into that graph and edit it a little bit. Say for example here, I want it to pop a bit more. I can do that nice and easily. Okay, so you can still adjust it, you're not locked in. It just makes it snappy and really easy to do. Now I also found that in the previous version, it looked better when it popped into existence after it had begun moving already. Okay, so it looks like really snappy. Now the way to do that is with these colored bars. You've noticed these colored bars on each layer, and they basically say, if you can see the colored bar at this point in time, it means that the object that the bar is associated with is visible. Okay, so if I were to click the end of this and drag it, if you see when we reach the blue timeline bar, If you move past it, it's disappeared now because it hasn't started yet. And when it catches up with that red bar, it turns it on. Now, the good thing is this doesn't affect your animation. You do all the keyframes, and changing the start in and out points doesn't affect that animation at all. Okay, so you can click and drag like that, or if you want to, you can use the shortcut Alt and then open square bracket to create the start in point, and then you can do Alt and close square bracket to create the out point. Now, we don't actually want the out point to disappear yet, so we'll leave that open. But you can see now, yeah, it's kind of created exactly the effect that we want. Now, this moves a lot more than in the previous version. Previously, so it's quite slow. This one, that's because we've done the position too much. Now, the good thing about After Effects is that it doesn't lock it in until you render it. I can just go back to this first keyframe here, make sure it's selected, and move it. And you can see that this little line represents the line of motion, okay? And I can adjust that all the way down here if I want to, or I can shift it all the way back up so it only moves a little bit. And then I also find with this animation particularly, if you move a few frames past where the animation starts and then have the frame clip in, like so, it really does add to that emphasis, because it's already started moving before it's visible. So if we were to look at this, for example, and bring this back, you can see that it still moves, okay, on those first few frames, but if you set it here, it doesn't become visible until it started moving. So it gives it that bit more oomph, okay? Maybe not that much, but there we go, maybe there. Perfect. Okay, so what happens after that then? After that, it scales up and underlines it. Okay, and that's what we're gonna look at now. So this is nice and simple. Basically, we've got our position keyframe on this layer. If you hit Shift and S, that adds the scale property to position. If we just hit S, it would just replace scale with position. The keyframes are still there, you just haven't got them visible. So if I hit P, it brings back the position keyframe. Yeah, it's still there. If I hit S, it disappears. Now, if I hit P and Shift S, it adds both. So you know you control both in the same sort of time. Okay, so when the next beat comes in, there, okay, we want this text to scale up. So we can just hit keyframe on scale. We move 60 frames, Control Shift, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right arrows. And then we hit the scale keyframe again, okay? And then this time you want it to animate from smaller to bigger. So on the second keyframe, we just animate it by going 100%, move that to 120, okay? And then again, the easing looks boring, so we can select those and click ease, and it creates it for you. Lovely. What I want to do is make that a bit more snappy. So you can go to the graph editor and just shift that along. And then, great, it shifted up. But you notice in this other version here, we've got a rectangle that underlines it. Like so, yeah, so we've got that. Boom. Kind of this comes in, starts at 0, stretches itself out to underline the phrase. Now that's super easy to do. So what we want to do is go to our last keyframe, because then we know this is how we want it to end up, yeah? And we draw how we want it to finish first. That's very important. So we don't want to stroke on this one. So if we hit Alt click, we can make that stroke off. And if we click fill and hit OK, we've now, when we draw without any layers selected, this is important. If you draw with a layer selected, for example, you actually create a mask for that layer. You can see that you can hide and unhide things depending on shape. We don't want that, we want to create a shape. So just make sure you've got no layers selected, and then you can actually draw a rectangle rather than a mask for that layer. So we get the shape roughly right that we want it to finish in. Okay, we can see that the anchor point is at the center of the stage rather than the center of the shape. So we can just redo that here. Again, if you don't have that plugin, you can use the pan behind tool and you can adjust it that way. But we're using Motion V2, so we can do that like so. We hit P to bring up position, we put it in the middle of the stage. Now, because we haven't made any keyframes yet, this isn't animating it, this is just positioning it, okay? If we were making a keyframe and then moved it around, that would animate everything. So we position it to be roughly where we want it to be in final. That's about good, but I want it to be a bit thinner, so we can shift that down a bit. Okay, that looks nice. What we want to do now then is make sure that this animates with the text that we just made. But we don't really want to spend our time making sure all the keyframes are lined up and it's animated perfectly and stuff. We just want it to be nice and easy. So let's drag it below here so that we know that those two items are linked. And to reinforce that, we can choose a different color by clicking here and giving them the same color as each other. So we can go brown, for example, a nice horrible brown, or we can go orange or something like that, to reinforce that these shapes are sort of linked together. What you do then is you make sure you're on your keyframe with your final point, and with your shape layer selected, which we'll just call underline, you grab this whip here, and if you click and drag, you see you get a little blue line that comes out of it. And if you hover over a layer, it brings up a box. And if you let go, whilst that box is over the layer, it ties this layer to this, meaning whatever is animated on this layer here, that line will follow it. Okay, you see? So that's got a shift in scale on that line now, even though if we go to scale here, there are no keyframes. And that's because it's tied to that other layer. Okay, so if we go to this part here, and then we did add a scale keyframe, and we click this little chain here to unconstrain the proportions, which basically means we can edit width independently from height. If we were to go and create 2 keyframes, like so, and then move to the first one and drag this scale down to 0, okay, and then we need to move it, the scale would increase from 0 to whatever it was, I think 83, okay, but it still is tied to the other keyframes on the other layer. So you can see that it's actually scaling with that text still, as well as now scaling independently of itself. Okay, so if we just then add the easing to that, like so. Oops. Zoom in there so we can actually do it properly, like that, and then this one too, like that. You can see that it snaps in, bam, like that, because they're nice and punchy. But this scale animation here is independent from this scale animation here. Okay, do you understand? So now let's take a look at what we've done. Now this is where I've messed up here. I've accidentally slipped this further along by a whole beat, accidentally. So this is actually a great opportunity to explain about moving layers. So you can see here, for example, I've done it all correctly, apart from I've done it a bit too late. So if I select this layer now, and this layer by shift clicking, and I click and drag, excuse me, someone posted on Facebook there. If I click and drag this, I can actually move in time the entire layer. You notice that all of the keyframes are moving with it. And what I can do is I can just position this over this audio clip there, and I can then click and drag to align that animation to it, okay? And then this layer independently, and the keyframes from the layer above, if you click and drag keyframes, you can move those without moving the layer. Again, it's all independent from each other. And then I can just position that over the next bit, bam, like that, and make sure that those are aligned. And then when I go to play it, okay, perfect. Now I think that's enough for today. That should be enough for you guys to be getting on with. Now, like I said, I don't want you copying me. I want you to create your own sort of thing with this, which is why I've tried to explain the process behind it a bit more than actually just telling you what to do. Click here, do this, etc. Now, let me explain something. I'm going to be releasing these weekly, but obviously I'm recording them all in one batch. So what I'm going to do is end the first episode here, and then in the week leading up to the next episode, if you have any questions, you can leave them in the comments below and I'll answer them there. Then when the next episode comes out, you can follow along with the next bit with hopefully a bit of extra knowledge that I've been able to tell you about via the comments section. So let me know if you guys like this, if you're enjoying it. I'm definitely going to finish this series at least, but hopefully I'll be able to do a few more. But I think we've done a lot of progress today. Doesn't seem like a lot, but we've actually covered a lot of sort of basics here, okay? We've covered keyframes, we've covered easing, we've covered layers, we've covered in and out points, we've covered moving without creating keyframes. There's lots of things going on. We've covered text, we've covered shape. So whilst this seems sort of like, well, we've only done 3 seconds of animation, we've actually covered quite a bit. So make sure you tune in next time when we're going to move on to the next part of the tutorial with all this interesting stuff going on here. Okay, we're probably going to get to the end of that screen next time. So make sure you join me, you guys, and I'll see you all next time.
Remember to subscribe for more tips, tricks, and tutorials. Thanks for watching.